Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Hope you're all in tip-top form. Today I've got a selection of CDs that I've been listening to recently, and most of these were actually picked at random. Okay, first up it's the Turtles and Happy Together, and this was put out on the German reissue label Repertoire. As you can see, it comes with a number of additional tracks. The band started out in 1965 as a folk rock act, very much in awe of the Byrds. By the time of this, their third album, the Turtles had morphed into a more radio-friendly sunshine pop sound. Songwriters Gary Bonner and Alan Gordon supplied the two hit singles Happy Together and She'd Rather Be With Me, and also a couple of other tracks on the album. Elsewhere there are nods to pop-friendly psychedelia, as you'd expect, seeing as this album came out in '67, and there's also a plethora of bonus cuts, including the drone-like Grim Reaper of Love. And next up it's Caravan and It's None of Your Business, and this came out on the Madfish label. This is a band I've had a soft spot for ever since I heard Golf Girl on Radio Caroline, which must have been in the mid-1970s. A major attraction for me then was the vocals of Richard Sinclair. Sadly, he didn't hang around too long, and the vocals of original member Pi Hastings are quite slight and nondescript in comparison to his. Remnants of their 1970s prog rock sound can be found on this album, which was released as recently as 2021, and that's mainly down, I think, to the presence of Jeffrey Richardson and his viola playing, and also a guest musician on flute Jimmy Hastings. The 9-minute title track has a really complex, almost sumptuous arrangement, and I also like the 3-minute instrumental at the conclusion of the album, Luna's Tuner, which has some lovely ethereal viola from Jeffrey Richardson, and it surely should have been expanded to become an epic, but sadly wasn't. Next up we have Doug Randall and Songs for the New Industrial State, and this came out on Light in the Attic. The album was rescued from obscurity by Light in the Attic, having originally been recorded way back in 1970 for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Randall was working as an in-house composer for the station at the time, and it was given a vinyl release the year after. The inspiration for the album had come from reading John Kenneth Galbraith's book of the same name. The songs are built around the argument that big businesses apply technology without ecological or human consideration. For them, it's all about production. Randall wrote all the music and lyrics and also conducted his own orchestral arrangements. The dual male-female vocals, usually in harmony together, are a bit of an acquired taste. It gives the album a real MOR feel. But if you've been touched by the vocal purity of, say, the Free Design, or also the track Suicide is Painless from the film MASH, then I think you may find something to enjoy in this CD. Next up, it's John KASTNER and Have You Seen Lucky? And this UK edition was put out on the Boss Tuneage label. By the time this album came out in 2006, KASTNER had already had a 20-year career in influential Canadian bands, the Asexuals, Doughboys and All Systems Go, and specialising in a sort of punchy power pop sound. This was his first release under his own name, and he described it at the time as a cross between everything I've done over the past 20 years. The odd star guest appears, most notably for some, Alex Lifeson, guitarist from Rush, of course. The best tracks for me hit that sweet spot where Foo Fighters and Cheap Trick align. The tracks Kick Back, the album opener, and Trainwreck Magnetism, for example. The slower It's All Too Familiar really cries out to be covered by the Lemonheads. Next up, it's the Gripweeds and Summer of a Thousand Years, and this was on the Rainbow Quartz label. The Gripweeds are still around today, specialising in psych-tinged guitar pop. They're currently on the Gem record label. This album was recorded back in 2001. If you like birdsy and jangling guitars and San Francisco summer love bands when they concentrated on pop song structures and catchy choruses, I think this should appeal. And moving along, we come to Tough and Stringy, Sessions 1966-1968 by Clarence White, and it's on the Big Beat label. As a superfan of the Kentucky Colonels and Byrds guitarist, it pains me to have to say this, but I was quite underwhelmed by this collection. From 1966 to 1968, he was working as a session guitarist on some really dire commercial country records. We're certainly not talking cool country rockers or cult folk singer-songwriters here. Also, you get poor sound quality on a number of the tracks as well, so the master tapes obviously weren't available. The selling points for me are the inclusion of his solo recordings for the Bakersfield International label, and you also get a couple of previously unreleased electrified tracks by the Kentucky Colonels, which are pretty amazing, and it's a pity they didn't get released at the time. One of these tracks, Everybody Has One But You, would have slotted in very nicely on the Sweetheart of the Rodeo album. Next up, it's Echo and the Bunnymen and Ocean Rain on Warner Music. Looking back now on the fourth album by the original four-piece version of Echo and the Bunnymen, this is the album, I think, where everything came together: songwriting, arrangements, and unfettered ambition. Influences came from the usual suspects, so Forever Changes, Era Love, Scott Walker, The Doors. The sound throughout is majestic, due in no small part to the orchestral arrangements of Adam Peters. The lyrics may at times topple over into pseudo-poetic twaddle, but in the context of the luscious arrangements, I'm in a forgiving mood today. Actually, their art rock pretensions prevented them from becoming empty-headed stadium rockers like U2 or Simple Minds did. It's also interesting to note that in September 2023, Echo and the Bunnymen are going to be going on a short tour in the UK with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra performing this album in its entirety. Next up, it's a 5-song mini album by the BEATIFICS called In the Meantime, and this was put out on the Bus Stop label. They were a Minneapolis-based band, and these tracks are culled together from the period 1997 through to 2000. I describe them as slightly twee US indie pop, but with some really catchy 60s influenced choruses. Sadly, they didn't go on to bigger and better things. Next up, it's the self-titled debut album by Fairport Convention, and this is on the Polydor label. It came out in 1968 and obviously predates their move to a total immersion into English folk music. Instead, at this time, they were besotted with then trendy American singer-songwriters. Does anyone really need an album with 2 covers of Joni Mitchell songs? I find myself longing for a really stretched out guitar solo from Richard Thompson, and the closest you get to that is on the track It's Alright Ma, It's Only Witchcraft. Elsewhere, you get some Sunshine Pop, or their take on it, on the track Sunshade, and Lovin' Spoonful style jug band music on the track If Stomp. Next up, it's a various artist compilation, Good Clean Fun, the Chizik Sampler on the Chizik label. The London-based independent label started in 1975, predating the more well-known Stiff records by a year. The first release was the Speedball EP by the Count Bishops, a very manic R&B band from London, and they're represented on this sampler by one track. Other highlights for me include the 101ers, which was Joe Strummer's first band, and the track Sweet Revenge, which was written by Strummers, included here. The liner notes by label boss Roger Armstrong describe Sweet Revenge as sounding a bit like Doug Psalm impersonating Van Morrison after a night on the tiles. Other favourite artists of mine on here include the Gorillaz with the legendary Jesse Hector, Radio Stars with the legendary Andy Ellison, and The Damned. The label, by the way, eventually mutated into the Ace reissue label. Next up, it's Beggars Banquet by the Rolling Stones, and this is the reissue that came out on the ABKCO label. It was their 7th UK studio album. I think it was their 9th studio album in America. Thankfully, there was a move away from the psychedelic whimsy of the previous couple of albums back to more straight-ahead rock with a relaxed country and blues feel on some of the tracks. Jimmy Miller's production keeps things simple. Every instrument is crystal clear, and Jagger's vocals are up front in the mix. It's the lesser known tracks such as Stray Cat Blues and Jigsaw Puzzle which can still wow you like the first time you heard them, and the complexity of the lyrics really impresses me. This is something that I don't think the Rolling Stones get enough credit for, and especially on the tracks Sympathy for the Devil and Jigsaw Puzzle. The lyrics are just perfect. Next up, it's Midtown by the Scruffs, and this was put out on the Northern Heights label. As a fan of Alex Chilton, I'm drawn to the Scruffs. They're also from Memphis, and they recorded their first album at Ardent Studios at the same time as Big Star were working on Third Sister Lovers. The Scruffs' third album, Midtown, is a bit of a mishmash of recordings from across the 1980s, and it also suffers a bit from a clinical 1980s sound. I do like My Little Russian Girl, that's a real highlight, and it's a fun song with band leader Stephen Burns falling for a Russian agent. Next up, it's an absolutely superb CD compilation, various artists compilation, Joe Meek Freak Beat, You're Holding Me Down, 30 Freak Beat mod and R&B nuggets, and this was put out on Castle Music. Producer Joe Meek was at the peak of his popularity in the early 60s, pre-Beatles of course, but he kept working in his London home studio at 304 Holloway Road up until his death in February 1967. It's fascinating to hear his take on the more adventurous music that UK beat groups were starting to explore at this time. There are some classics included on here, particularly like the Syndicats, Crawdaddy Simone, pioneering freak beat sound from 1965. It's got a memorable unhinged guitar solo, and hard to believe that it languished as a B-side at the time. Also, I really like The Buzz, You're Holding Me Down. They were an Edinburgh-based band. It's a real statement of intent as track 1 on the CD. The vocalist screams as he fights for attention over the distorted backing, and it's a definite precursor to the sound that the Stooges would develop in 3 or 4 years' time. You also get excellent liner notes by David Wells, who now runs Grapefruit Records, part of the Cherry Red label. In particular, Wells includes a short interview with the Bird of Praise guitarist. Their 2 demos show them to be mod gods in waiting, and it's a travesty that they didn't get to record at the time or after that. And moving on, we come to John Wesley Harding and Why We Fight, and this was put out on the Sire record label. It was his third studio album, came out in 1992. He's a English, clever, literate singer-songwriter. He unfairly got compared to Elvis Costello upon the release of his debut album, Here Comes the Groom. I suppose having Pete Thomas and Bruce Thomas of The Attractions on the album inevitably led to lazy journalists referring to Costello. This album found him being produced by Steve Berlin of Los Lobos, and the album has an Americana sound, albeit with an English accent. The best song on here, in my opinion, is Ordinary Weekend, where he loses his job and finishes up as the driver on an armed robbery. An interesting artist and very much underappreciated here in the UK. Next, it's Tito Puente and the album Tito Puente and his Concert Orchestra, and this was put out on the Fania label. It's a 1973 album by the salsa band leader. Possibly the best gig I ever went to was Tito Puente, together with the queen of salsa, Celia Cruz. He put together for the first time for this album a 22-piece orchestra, plus an electric guitarist and also keyboardist Charlie Palmieri. The influence of blaxploitation funk is self-evident on some of the tracks, and he also took the opportunity to re-record some of his old hits with this bigger orchestra. It's wonderful stuff. Okay, let me know what you've been listening to in the comments below, and I'm struggling to find quality charity shop CDs, but I have almost got together enough for another video, so that will possibly be the next video that I'll be posting in a week or so. Okay, so take care. I'll see you again soon.